everyone, Archana is here. Welcome to the 16th session of presentation, ICSE Class 10, Paper 2, Literature in English. In today's session, let us continue with the play The Merchant of Venice, Act 1, Scene 2, Act 2, Scene 1 and 2, written by William Shakespeare. Before we deal with today's session, let us just brush up what we have learned in the previous session. In the previous session, we have learned that the opening line of the play reveals that Antonio, the merchant of Venice, is sad, but he does not know the reason of his sadness. The play then exposes the situation on which the story is built. We come to know that the main story is about the love of Bassanio and Portia. Soon, we come to know that Bassanio needs money in order to visit Portia. So, he goes to Antonio to get money. But it is revealed that Antonio does not have ready money. He asks Bassanio to borrow money on his, that is Antonio's credit. He will gladly stand surety for the money that he borrows. Thus, Shakespeare reveals a deep bond of friendship between Antonio and Bassanio. Antonio tells Bassanio that all his wealth and even his life are at his disposal. So, the first scene reveals Antonio's melancholy, love of Bassanio and Portia, and friendship between Antonio and Bassanio. So it introduces major characters and gives a foretaste of the kind of action that would follow. So Antonio's melancholy is ominous and sets the tone of the play. So the Bond story and the casket story are linked together. So the friendship between Antonio and Bassanio has been described in vivid terms. So the scene prepares us for threefold action. There is Bassanio's Belmont cited hopes, Lorenzo's promise to meet Bassanio later in the evening, and Antonio's undertaking to raise funds for Bassanio. In scene 2, we are introduced to the heroine of the play, that is Portia, in her home at Belmont. She is uncertain of her future due to the strange provisions of her father's will with regard to her marriage. According to her father's will, a person who chooses the right casket out of the 3 caskets will be able to marry her. But the story moves ahead when Portia recollects Bassanio's earlier visit. She remembers Bassanio with tender thoughts of him. We come to know about Portia's liking for Bassanio from the conversation between Portia and her maid Nerissa. From the conversation, we make out that Nerissa is a clever and witty maid. Then, a number of suitors are talked about. In them, we find a revelation of the various types of European personalities of those times. The Prince of Naples thinks of nothing but horsemanship. The Count Palatine is a joyless person. The Frenchman is a hot-headed person. The Englishman is queerly dressed. The Scottish lord is a coward. So these character sketches of various suitors amuse the readers. So the scene introduces Portia and Nerissa. It informs us of the casket lottery. We also learn of Portia's interest in Bassanio. Now let us deal with Act 1, Scene 3 and Act 2, Scene 1 and 2. Act 1, Scene 3. This scene is set in Venice. So here, in this particular scene, we can see 3 characters, that is Bassanio, Shylock and Antonio. Bassanio and Shylock are found talking. Bassanio wants Shylock to lend him 3,000 ducats for 3 months on Antonio's surety. Shylock feels happy inwardly, but tells Bassanio that it is difficult to depend upon Antonio's surety as all his ships are on the sea. Then he adds that he is ready to give him loan as he wants to befriend them. When Bassanio invites him to dinner, he says he is prepared to do business with the Christians, but he cannot dine with them or pray with them. When Antonio appears, Shylock pretends as if he has not noticed him. He talks to himself, thinking of his hatred for Antonio, and he resolves to revenge himself on him. He hates Antonio because he is a Christian, but he hates him chiefly because Antonio lends money without charging interest. So Antonio has abused and humiliated him in public on many occasions. So Shylock pledges that if ever Antonio gets into his trap, he will teach him a lesson. So Shylock says that he does not have 3,000 ducats, but he will borrow the amount from one of his Jewish friends named Tubal. Antonio tells Shylock that he neither lends nor borrows money on interest, but still he will request him to lend money to Bassanio on his personal surety. Shylock tells Antonio that he too does not charge any interest, but then he makes money, breeds money as Jacob, their prophet, made the use of Laban breed lambs for him. Antonio gets annoyed with Shylock because he thinks that he, like the devil, can quote scriptures to serve his own purpose. When Antonio tells him that he is not asking for loan for himself but for his friend Bassanio, Shylock remarks he has been insulting him in private as well as in public places, and yet he is now asking for loan from him. Antonio asserts that he will continue insulting him and he wants him to lend him money like an enemy, and if he fails to return the money in time, he might charge the heaviest penalty from him. Shylock then asks him to calm down and go to some lawyer to execute some merry bond. He tells him that it will be written in the bond that if Antonio fails to return the money in time, he will be entitled to cut a pound of flesh. To cut a pound of flesh from any part of Antonio's body. Bassanio is opposed to such a bond. He tells Antonio not to sign such a bond, but Antonio assures him that he will be able to return 3,000 ducats before the appointed day. On hearing Bassanio's words, Shylock says that Christians are unduly suspicious. He adds that 1 pound of human flesh is more worthless than 1 pound of mutton or beef or any other human flesh. He tells them that he would not gain anything by cutting 1 pound of flesh from Antonio's breast on the forfeiture of the bond. So next act, that is Act 2, Scene 1. The setting of the scene is in Belmont, and the characters we see here is Portia and the Prince of Morocco. The scene opens in a room of Portia's house. The Prince of Morocco entreats Portia not to reject him on account of his dark complexion, which he has acquired from the hot climate of his country. He tells her that though his complexion is dark, his blood is redder than that of any other fairest man. Portia tells the Prince of Morocco that the choice of a suitor is not in her hands. She has to marry a person according to the will left by her father. Had she been free in the choice of her marriage, she would have selected him in spite of his dark complexion. On hearing these words, the Prince of Morocco feels flattered, and then he boasts of his physical strength and courage. He brags that he has killed 3 Persian princes. He tells her that he is so brave that he can snatch away the young ones from the breast of a female bear. He adds that he can also tease a hungry lion who is in search of his prey. But it is sad that sometimes chance does not favor the strongest man. It happened with the great Hercules. Hercules has beaten in a game of chess by his servant Lichess in spite of the fact that he was the strongest man in Greece. So Portia tells him that he has to take a chance. Moreover, he has to obey the conditions laid down in her father's will. She tells him that if he fails to choose the right casket, he is not to disclose this secret to anybody. Also, he is not to approach any lady for making love to her. So, before he takes a chance, he must take into consideration all these conditions. Act 2, Scene 2. This particular act will take place in Venice, and the characters we find in this act: Lancelot, the Old Gobo, Bassanio, Lorenzo, Gratiano. Lancelot Gobo, a boy servant with Shylock, is in a fix. He does not know whether he should continue in the Jew's service or not. His conscience tells him that he should leave, while the devil advises him to the contrary. Ultimately, he decides to give up the job. The Old Gobo, his father, who is a blind man, appears on the scene. Lancelot plays tricks with him. He confuses him by giving wrong directions to Shylock's house. Then he gives him a fright by telling him that his son is dead. When the old man begins to shed tears, he reveals his identity. The Old Gobo fails to recognize him because he has grown a beard. Lancelot proves his identity by telling him the name of his mother. Then he reveals to his father that he is going to leave Shylock's service and join Bassanio's, as Bassanio is a generous master who gives fine clothes to his servants. Bassanio appears on the scene when in the company of Lorenzo and others. The Old Gobo requests Bassanio to take his son Lancelot into his service. When both begin to speak to Bassanio, they create a confusion. Then Bassanio asks them to speak one at a time. Thereafter, Bassanio agrees to take Lancelot into his service. But Bassanio warns Lancelot that it is not advisable to leave the service of a wealthy merchant and take up a job with a poor master like Bassanio. But Lancelot is determined to do so. He remarks, "Sir, you have the grace of God, and he hath enough." Bassanio is pleased with his remark and orders for the finest clothes for Lancelot. Lancelot is very happy to get this job. He examines his palm and tells himself that he has got 11 widows and 9 maids for his wives. He also says to himself that he will escape from being drowned thrice. At this moment, Gratiano appears and requests Bassanio to take him along with him to Belmont. Bassanio agrees to take him with him provided he keeps his tongue in check at Belmont. Gratiano assures him that he will present himself as a very serious and sober man. But Gratiano requests Bassanio to allow him to be a little free with his tongue at Venice. Bassanio agrees because he has invited Antonio to dinner at his place and he wants Gratiano to entertain him with his witty and humorous remarks. So students, here we have winded up Act 1, Scene 3, Act 2, Scene 1 and Scene 2. Let us conclude today's session. Students, today we have learned Act 1, Scene 3. In Act 1, Scene 3, the action of this particular scene takes place in Venice. Again, here we are introduced to the rich Jew, Shylock, one of the most complex and remarkable characters of Shakespeare. In order to help his friend Bassanio, Antonio signs a dangerous bond which takes the story further. The friendliness and frankness that Shylock shows towards Antonio are skillfully described by Shakespeare. We also come to know of Antonio's arrogance and hatred for Shylock. He has been in the habit of abusing him, spitting on him and kicking him like a cur. Shylock, who has been insulted and ill-treated by Antonio, finds a good opportunity to entrap Antonio. So he gets a dangerous bond signed by him. Though Shylock craftily gets the bond signed, the whole affair looks natural. Antonio is confident that all his ships on the sea will return safely before the appointed day. Shylock, on his part, tells Antonio that penalty would not be extracted at the forfeiture of the bond. So here Shakespeare describes the hostility between the Jews and the Christians. He presents the hated Jewish moneylender in a remarkable manner. In Act 2, Scene 1, we can see the Prince of Morocco, one of the suitors, is introduced in the scene. He is a lightly drawn character. He has a dark complexion and is conscious of it. We come to know about his character from his speech. He boasts that he possesses a lot of physical strength and courage. The scene also gives sufficient information about the casket trial. Portia tells the Prince of Morocco about the conditions laid down in her father's will. He who makes the effort has to obey the conditions. And Act 2, Scene 2, we have learned that in this particular scene, Shakespeare introduces witty and humorous characters because the Elizabethan audience loved to listen to humorous and witty remarks and droll speeches on the stage. So, by introducing Lancelot and Gratiano in the play, Shakespeare catered to the taste of the Elizabethan audience. Lancelot is a servant to Shylock. He wants to leave his service and take up a job with Bassanio. He amuses the audience when he talks about his conscience and the voice of the devil. The remarks that Lancelot makes are full of nonsense, and his humor consists in the wrong use of words. It is called low comedy, but the Elizabethans were fond of it. Lancelot is not a well-drawn comic character of Shakespeare. So about Gratiano, Bassanio remarks that he will allow him to make witty and humorous remarks to entertain his friend Antonio. So students, in the next session, we will learn Act 2, Scene 3 to Scene 9. Thank you students.